Ellarku Namaskara. This is Gopi K, your host for today. On behalf of VHS Karnataka, very warm welcome to all the wonderful viewers for the 50th edition of Online Samvada, brought to you by VHS Karnataka. We had 49 amazing sessions of Samvada from VHS Karnataka until now, including last Fridays on how Hindu rulers protected Bharat by Dr. Omendru Ratnu. What a well-researched session was that. Coming to the point, today's topic, planet Earth has 71% of water, 29% of land mass on its surface. Bharat is not alone on this planet Earth. There are about 195 countries occupying the land mass. Bharat shares its border with 7 countries. We can list them, but you can go through them, in fact, and many neighboring countries as well. To know about how the geopolitics plays in these scenarios, to know more about this, and and where does Bharat stand in the geopolitical sphere? We have special guest speaker, Professor Madhav Das Nalapat, geopolitical expert, vice chair, Manipal Advanced Research Group, an author, a prolific speaker, and TV debater. And welcome, Professor M.D. Nalapat. And we are also joined by Sri Nikunshaji, VHS Karnataka State President, and Sri Tejas. Without any further ado, now I request Professor M.D. Nalpatji to enlighten us, all of us, on how India emerges as keystone country on Indo-Pacific security, for Indo-Pacific security. Please, Nalpatji.
Thank you, Gopi. Ellargu namaskara. Karnataka is really my favorite state after Kerala, and I spent 5 very happy years here as the resident editor of the Times of India. I remember every one of those years, and I traveled across Karnataka, and I mean, I have no words to describe how wonderful the people are, and how wonderful your state is. Uh, Let me say very clearly that, you know, we have to understand when an era changes, we have to understand that the entire needs, necessities, and in fact, or the understanding of a situation needs to change along with the era. Now, we had in the world for quite some time what was called Cold War 1.0. Cold War 1.0 was between the US and the USSR primarily. It was a systemic war, a war of systems. The USSR had a particular system of economic and societal control and development, and the US had a separate system, or as some others argue, a lack of systems that they felt were not necessary. And you must remember that when there's no need for some kind of a system, there's no need for a system. Human beings are able to exercise judgment on their own. Well, we in that particular Cold War 1.0, guess which was the country that was a force multiplier for the United States in ensuring that the Soviet Union was weakened, and of course in looking after itself very well during that time, in ensuring that the Soviet Union, which from the time of Mao Zedong, and I'm talking of the 1930s, by the way, I'm not talking of Mao post 1949, when his party effectively took over China and then started gobbling up other territories, including Tibet. It already taken over Xinjiang, Inner Mongolia, Manchuria. From that time, Mao had regarded the Soviet Union and Soviet communism as usurpers of the position of world leaders of communism, world leaders of the coming revolution. What Lin Biao, at that time his loyal defense minister, said, the war of the villages against the cities. The villages are the underdeveloped world. The cities are the developed world. And the villages surround the developed world and eventually overwhelm the cities. And Mao said, this is China has to be in the leadership role, not the USSR. Of course, he was very tactful about this, and and as a consequence, for some time, Stalin did help him. Also, at the same time, helping the KMT. The Russians helped the KMT right up to 1949, when the KMT was finally forced to withdraw to Taiwan in defeat. But so this in this world, the Chinese from Mao's time onwards were actually looking at the US as a lesser enemy to fight the greater enemy, because that was an ideological enemy. And for those who believe in ideologies, and I think all of us are individuals who believe in ideology, there is nothing more deadly than an individual who claims to be of the same ideology but is not. So so basically, according to Mao, the Soviet Union, especially after Khrushchev took over General Secretary following the demise of Stalin, the Soviet Union was not really communist at all. It was only China that was keeping alive the flag of communism worldwide. Of course, very few countries agreed with it. In the Europe, the continent that Mao paid a lot of attention to, the one country that agreed with him was Albania. That was it. In Asia, I don't think in any country really agreed with him. But anyway, that the Chinese were a force multiplier for the United States in Cold War 1.0 in helping to ensure the weakening of the Soviet Union and eventually the collapse of the Soviet Union. So in that systemic conflict, the US system technically won. I am saying technically because let's be honest, during that time, a rival system had become strong because of assistance from the US, from Taiwan, from Japan, countries that frankly today are all three, along with India, among the four targets of the PRC. So it was not that the American system prevailed, because what was active in China was not really a full-blown capitalist system. It was capitalism with Chinese characteristics, which essentially means communism with capitalist characteristics. And as a consequence, the Chinese economy grew. Our economy and Chinese economy in the beginning of the 80s was equal. Today, the Chinese are about 4.5 times bigger. They were about 5 times bigger. I think they're now about 4.5 times bigger. But this is what happened. Now, in fact, I don't know. I mean, I'd like to, in case there are people who have used this term before me, I'd be happy to acknowledge that. But I started many years ago using the term Cold War 2.0. Long back, I wrote a piece about the need to constrain China. You cannot contain China because China is not the Soviet Union, economically, etc. You can constrain China. And that is a paper I wrote about 15 years ago. So from that time, I've been looking at the world as being enmeshed in Cold War 2.0. Cold War 2.0, which in my view began in 1997 with the departure of the British from Hong Kong, because it gave a tremendous adrenaline boost to the CCP, and that they can prevail over the West. They saw the Hong Kong handover, the British leaving Hong Kong, as a sign that the West is on the decline and China is on the ascendant. And from that time, we have been effectively in Cold War 2.0. Of course, even today, very many individuals who are quote unquote politically correct, I'd rather not be politically correct. I'd rather be correct. Now, if you're incorrect and being politically correct, I'm not sure that's a smart way of operating, but that's the way many people operate. Good for them. So the reality is we are in Cold War 2.0, and there is a battle of systems. The difference is it's not a unipolar world. It's not even a bipolar world. It's a multipolar world in which China is trying to be the unipolar entity. It's trying to be what the United States was for a time, the only pole in the unipolar world. And in this, I would say there is no question that India is not going to be on the same side of China. Now, the fact is, it's not even our choice. The Chinese have already decided that for us. The Chinese know that India is a country that is potentially a competitor to them. Like they knew they themselves were a competitor to the United States, but people in the United States were not aware of that. Let me assure you, the Chinese have not made the same mistake with India that the Americans made with China. And the Chinese know very well India can be a formidable competitor if the policy matrix is right, the human matrix is excellent, and if the policy matrix is right, India can overtake China. And India, it will never be a unipolar world, but it will have to be a multipolar world. And in the CCP worldview, that began in 1923. The earliest writings about a unipolar world in which the Chinese communism is the shining star. If I'm not mistaken, the initial thing came 2 years after the party was founded in 2023, or maybe it is 2024. I'm not entirely sure. That was some time ago that I did that research. But the reality of the situation is that they want a unipolar world. The Americans have been forced to accept that it's a multipolar world. They're never going to get back the unipolarity that they once had. And the Chinese want to be the unipolar power. Now, China has chosen for us. They have embraced Pakistan. They are trying to embrace countries in Sri Lanka, etc. They have got lobbies in India. The purpose is to weaken and hollow out India so that India can never emerge as a serious competitor to China. Economically, militarily, in any way, it cannot emerge as a serious competitor to China. So across the world, the Sino-Wahhabi network, they have linked up with Wahhabism, because Wahhabism is also a force completely which regards India as a target, and China sees India as a target. So the two enemies of the target have come together. The two enemies of another target, the United States and India, the two biggest democracies, have come together. So in that situation, the choice is made for us. We have to be with those countries who are resisting the advent of Chinese unipolarity. And here, the most significant cockpit is the Indo-Pacific. There was an Atlanticist world. And you're seeing in Ukraine, frankly, the fact that the Europeans and the Europeanists among the Americans, Bill Clinton is a Europeanist, Hillary is a Europeanist, Biden, poor chap, is, I think, a Europeanist, Blinken and Jake Sullivan are Europeanists. In other words, they still believe Europe and America, the two sides of the Atlantic Ocean, comprises the fulcrum of the world. Sorry, that shifted by the close of the 1990s into Eurasia, into the Indo-Pacific, into the Eurasian landmass, which is why China, for example, through this Belt and Road project, is trying to really become the hub of the Eurasian landmass. First the Eurasian landmass, then the Indo-Pacific, and now you see, for example, the naval, the Silk Road. You see various other efforts at ensuring through ports in various locations that are effectively or will soon be Chinese military facilities. So first control the Eurasian landmass through Russia, through a friendship with Russia. And in the case of Russia, it was Bill Clinton who basically decided there's no difference between the Russian Federation and the USSR. So he had a policy of total opposition to Russia joining the EU or NATO. Russia desperately wanted to join the EU and NATO. Gorbachev and Yeltsin were surrendered. They gave concession after concession after concession to NATO, to the EU, to the US. And each time a concession was given, well, all that these guys wanted was more without giving anything back. Sounds familiar? It sounds very familiar to some of the diplomacy that we have conducted with China and Pakistan in the past. But anyway, so I'd like to say that you know, in this situation, the reality is that this Cold War 2.0 is now being acknowledged as a fact, absolutely as a fact. And, I mean, I've written a book on foreign policy called 75 Years of Indian Foreign Policy, which is on Amazon, but will soon be in global Amazon and will soon be freely available in the bookshelves by Rupa. And the point is, I'm not going for a foreign policy based on the world of the past, the world of Cold War 1.0, which is what the Americans and the Europeans implicitly have accepted when they with their policies towards Ukraine. Ukraine is of decisive strategic significance along with Belarusia to Russia. Ukraine and Belarusia or Belarus are the two countries through which you can have a successful land invasion into Russia. The strategic value to the NATO and to the West is very much lower unless you want an invasion into Russia, which I hope the NATO people do not want. So it is an insane kind of thing, frankly, what they have done or what they're doing in Ukraine, because they have created a diversion, a complete, focus of oxygen on a theater and a country of subsidiary concern, and in the process, they're neglecting the real theater, which is the Indo-Pacific. I'd like to just briefly end this thing by saying that if the United States does for India 1/5 of what it is doing for Ukraine, a much less important country to the United States, a much less important country to the future of this Cold War 2.0, much less means infinitely much less. Well, I can tell you, we will be able to ensure that and you can never say what's going to happen. It's either Taiwan or it's going to be India, but a kinetic conflict is more or less certain. If the United States gives us 1/5 of the assistance on 1/5 of the terms, 1/5 of the assistance given on the terms that they're given to Ukraine, believe me, we can, as Winston Churchill says, once we have the tools, we can finish the job. The Americans armed the Soviet army and they armed the British Air Force and of course the British Secret Services and all that. And these two powers combined to destroy Nazi Germany with American assistance. America was the arsenal of democracy. In Cold War 1.0, America was the arsenal not of democracy, but of other things, including covert activity. But this time around, America can be the arsenal of democracy if it understands the value to the future of democracy of India prevailing over the PRC in a kinetic conflict, in a theater within the PRC. Let's not always fight in our own territory. In the case of the Vajpayee government, they told the Air Force, don't cross the line of control. Well, the Air Force pilots would have crossed from Indian territory to Indian territory. Of course, in Balakot, Prime Minister Modi went and crossed into what is Pakistan territory, not just Indian territory, but is occupied Kashmir. But even that prohibition was kept. But the point is, the next war, very soon, it will be begun in Indian territory by Chinese. It has got to then move into Chinese territory, or rather Chinese controlled territory. And I'm quite confident that if the democracies understand the danger, and if the democracies understand the need to work together. See, I want to say that I've very often spoken about the need not to go ahead with the S-400. It was mistaken as an anti-Russian kind of thing. It was not anti-Russian. Now, for example, I'm a very strong supporter of buying as much oil and gas as we can from Russia. As much of resources of Russia that we can afford to buy, let's buy at bargain prices. Let's stand with Russia in the Ukraine conflict. But in my view, let's buy resources. Let's not buy Russian weapons. because the fact is Russia militarily is deeply aligned with China, and we need to broaden and broad base our weapons platforms, and most importantly, ensure those platforms produce in India. Lockheed, McDonnell Douglas, Grumman, Boeing, Airbus, buy them, but produce in India, make in India, and use India as a production base to export. And then you will be able to meet any kind of competition. You can reduce your cost by 30%. You can reduce your prices by 20%. And you can be competitive. Only way you can be competitive is produce in India. The only way India can ramp up its production sufficiently to meet the challenge of the coming 3, 5, 10, 15 years is to understand that we need a partnership of democracies going forward. In this, I'd like to say the Sino-Wahhabi alliance is busy in the United States, poisoning the minds of people in America about India. Ilhan Omar, for example, is an example, and she's not the only example. All kinds of nonsense is being said about India. You look at mathematics, look at what's happened to minorities. In Pakistan, there are no minorities, they've almost disappeared. In Afghanistan, they've been extinguished. In some parts of India also, unfortunately, they were allowed to be extinguished. That's a different story. Bangladesh, they are being extinguished. But does anybody talk about what is happening to minorities there? No. They only talk about what's happening to minorities in India. And how many minorities do we have in India? And I'd like to say, I am a strong believer in equal treatment to all faiths. I do not believe in racial or religious supremacy. I don't believe that we should put one religion above anything else. And Sanatan Dharma means, as as the RSS Sarsang Chalak said, the DNA of every Indian is the same. Dr. Swami has said the same thing. The DNA of every Indian is the same. And I agree with Dr. Swami about another matter also, which I'm sure that the RSS Sarsang Chalak will warmly welcomes. I'm certainly warmly welcomes. That look, India was partitioned on the basis of religion. Let's be honest about it. But after 47, the governments in India, led by Jawaharlal Nehru, began by Jawaharlal Nehru, completely trying to rub the history books of the reality of partition. Nehru spoke of Pakistan as just another country, not a country cut out of India on the basis of religion. And as a consequence, he neglected historical justice. And in my view, historical justice is 2 or 3 pillars. One, Kashi, Mathura, and Ayodhya need to come to their pre-Aurangzeb level. Let them come to the level of Emperor Jahangir time. Let them come to the level of Emperor Shah Jahan time. Because I am not a person who's, viscerally against any religion or any period in our history. There have been good and bad in every period. Aurangzeb was he was a terrorist. And as a consequence, what happened was the Mughal Empire also collapsed. These 3 holy sites, and only these 3 holy sites, those who talk about 300 sites, 3,000 sites, 30,000 sites, you are actually missing the wood for the trees. Focus on these 3 sites, and I'm very certain if it's these 3 sites, I'm very, very certain that Muslims will accept it as they've accepted the Babri Masjid really being the Ram Mandir, and by the grace of the divine power, with the grace of the divine, the Ram Mandir is now returned to what it was before Aurangzeb destroyed it, and Kashi. Second point is place of worship of the Hindus. For heaven's sake, why should Hindu place of worship be under state control? Padmanabha Swami temple has got $30 billion worth of jewelry, according to people. Almost all the jewelry was contributed by the Travancore royal family. You have temples, major temples, I don't want to name them, all over, South India, North India, East India, West India, where for centuries, all the public have been giving money and gold and jewelry. I know because my mother, when I was 6, 7 years old and I was dying of pleurisy, she gave all the gold she had to Guruvayur temple. all the gold she had. Is that in Guruvayur temple now? I don't think so. Guruvayur temple is all these temples put together will not have 1/100th of the wealth of Padmanabha Swami temple when they should have 1,000 times more wealth than Padmanabha Swami temple. So why are temples remaining in the control of governments? Why can't they go to the control of believers and under transparent administration? And the third point is secularism means equal treatment to all. It means what the French call laicite, complete equal treatment to all. Now, if a Hindu sets up a school or a university, 25% has to be reserved for government quota under the Right to Education Act. If a Christian or a Muslim sets it up, that's not imposed. Christians and Muslims are as charitable as Hindus. They want to do as much good to society as Hindus. Why did the UPA insist that only Hindus should do the charity and not Christians and Muslims who are perfectly ready and willing and wonderful people ready to do that charity? So this discrimination that is there is, in my view, a transgression of secularism. And there has to be equal treatment to all, including on a uniform civil code. It's very important. Now, I argue with friends in the West. Oh my God, your government is asking for a UCC. So I say, oh, you're in Germany. How many wives is a citizen of Germany allowed to have? One, of course. Yes. Well, that's what we're asking for. If it's not toxic for you, why is it toxic for me? So the point is this. The reality is we are also in a battle with a deadly Sino-Wahhabi force. This battle can only be won by smart tactics and by smart strategy, by smart weaponry and by smart targeting. And if we don't do that, let's be honest, if this battle is not won, it will be a great loss for Dharma. But I do believe India is divinely, in a sense, strengthened and that India will win the war. All of us will win this war, especially the younger generation will win this war. But I want to say, in this war, the Chinese already believe they have got more or less control of the Eurasian landmass. Now they want control of the waters of the Indo-Pacific. And that is where an alliance of democracies comes in and non-democracies such as Vietnam. All countries wanting a free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific need to come together against a country that believes all these waters should be either belong to it, as the South China Sea, or be controlled by it, which in its view is the entire Indo-Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Tejas? Okay. Thank you, Professor Nalapat for an amazing insight on geopolitics and also how they are affecting inside India, especially the Sino-Wahhabi alliances. I mean, we call it as leftist, jihadi, whatever we name it as. And before completely going into the Indo-Pacific theater, I would like to just touch base on what you call the Cold War 1.0 still. Is current US administration having the hangover of Cold War 1.0 still? Are they still hanging in there?
Gopi, let me tell you that I don't know if you teach geopolitics, but you should. You are perfectly right. The reality is that the European powers do not want to lose the primacy they once had in global politics to Asian countries. China, they have been forced to accept because of its size. Japan is not really a threat because Japan will never get into Asia. To India, and also to Japan, let's say. They don't want that. And the only way they can do that is to drag the United States back to Cold War 1.0, when the major allies were Germany, France, and Britain. Today, the major allies have got to be India, Indonesia, countries like that, Vietnam, Japan, India, Indonesia, Japan, Australia. And the Europeans don't want that. And that is why They want Cold War 1.0 to come back, and the Ukrainian situation became a heaven sent opportunity for them to impose policies that have relevance to Cold War 1.0. The only country gaining from the way this war is being prosecuted is China. And this is something I'd like to say. The government of India, led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, has understood that very well. And as a consequence, India has adopted a very clear policy that in effect, we are in Cold War 2.0. The main problem is China. Don't divert your attention and your oxygen. And we don't want to completely, drive Russia ever closer to China the way you Europeans and Americans have. So yes, Gopi, you're perfectly right. And I told you, Biden is a Europeanist. Blinken and Jake Sullivan are Europeanists. If you look at the travel schedules of Biden and Blinken over the last several decades, 80-85% of travel is to and from Europe. For them, all of wisdom is only in Europe. Asia, Africa, Latin America, and kuch nahi milega. Instead of Europe. And the European, the Atlantic Alliance people, 85% travel will be to North America and nowhere. So this is a very strong hangover of the past. China benefited hugely from Cold War 1.0, and China is benefiting hugely from the Ukraine war, which is why two things I predicted. One, winter will see in Europe every European leader supporting the Ukraine, the war, in the way the West is sanctioning Russia and harming itself, will become unpopular. You've seen Macron lose his majority. You've seen Boris Johnson be kicked out. You're seeing Biden, the most unpopular president. And poor old Scholz is also in a similar situation. Draghi is out. And the second point is China would like to continue this war for at least 2 to 3 years. Until China is ready to pounce on either India or Taiwan, China would like this war to continue. And that is the message it must be giving Russia. No, continue. And of course, the Ukrainians are making it easy. The Europeans and Americans are making it easy by not accepting the reality of settling with Russia now rather than later, when Ukraine will lose even more people, even more land than they have already. So yes, you're perfectly right. There is unfortunately a kind of an obsession with Cold War 1.0, when in a time of Cold War 2.0, and the whole world is suffering from that, including economically.
Thank Coming to the, CCP, is CCP, China, core principle is expansionism? If so, why? And where exactly this come from, sir?
See, it's a question of. Sorry, please go ahead, Gopi.
No. Go ahead, sir.
You're talking about the CCP. You must understand the CCP regards itself as the beacon of the light of the new world. And you see, in China, if you went in the past to a Chinese bookshop, nowadays they've kept those books away. Only hardened party people are allowed to buy them. So the rest of the world thinks China is no longer communist. It's Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought. Now you can buy books on Mao Zedong thought and Xi Jinping thought. Lenin and Marx are gone. It is now Mao Zedong and Xi Jinping. And I think given the genius and glory of Xi Jinping, it will soon be only Xi Jinping thought that you can pick up in China. But the reality is they have always sought to dominate the world ideologically. And their concept of war is weaken the enemy in such a way that a few shots will be enough, if necessary, to overpower him. Weaken the enemy by destroying the health, destroying the economy, destroying society. And if you check my writings, you'll notice that right from 2020 onwards, I've been warning about the fact that in United States and India, the fringe groups of hate are going to multiply. Fringe and Karnataka, you're seeing that erupt. People are killing each other. These are fringe groups. One group killing the other, the other killing the group. It becomes a self-reinforcing situation. And this is that deliberately created by the Sino-Wahhabi alliance through their influence in social media, through manipulation of social media messaging, to make individuals hate what they regard as the other and to see them as a threat when in fact they're an opportunity. And this fringe, if it grows, it's growing in the United States. It's not, I don't think, growing in a similarly toxic way in India, but we have to be careful. We're not out of the woods. But if the fringes grow at the expense of the moderate majority, that society is weakened. And that society is more vulnerable to an attack by the PRC. What does the PRC want to do in the case of Taiwan? They want very clearly the Taiwanese people should be so much in shock and awe of the PRC that they will not take up arms as a citizen militia to defend themselves in the event of an invasion of China. Number two, that the Western world will be so scared of China, and we'll know very soon, how scared they are, because Joe Biden is scared. According to Joe Biden, the Pentagon is also scared, terrified. But in my view, if Speaker Pelosi goes, it will show that America as a whole is not scared. But they want the NATO to be so scared, they will not intervene in a war in defense of Taiwan. Now, in the case of Ukraine, even in the case of Ukraine, a European country next door to NATO members, they have not interfered. So they're saying the invasion of Taiwan will take place once they're convinced of two things. One, that NATO will not interfere. Not only that, even on supply of weaponry, of course, the Chinese believe they can interdict the weaponry much better than Russia can interdict. Russia has interdicted a fair amount of weaponry, nearly half in my estimation. The Chinese can interdict about 80%. But they will not be direct American aircraft, naval ships, NATO aircraft, certainly not military troops in that. And secondly, the Taiwanese public will not fight them. And they will say, all right, this big army has come. We don't like communism, but we have no choice. So on this postulate, they are doing that. And one thing that happened about Galwan, a very important thing, if I may say so, the Chinese realized that India and Indians will fight. In Galwan, my estimate at that time itself, based on satellite tracking data, which was made available to me by some friends. I've got friends across the world, and they give me interesting data. And they had said it's about 60 people. The Russians actually said 50. Their estimate was 50 before that website was asked to shut up by the Chinese, and they shut up. The Russian website gave 50. Some websites gave 80. The Chinese have finally come up with 6, I think. The fact is, 60 people were killed when 20 of our Jawans were killed. And the Chinese soldiers understood the ferocity of the Indian soldier. So again, I repeat, give us the tools and we will finish the job. If we have a good supply chain, as Ukraine, for example, is getting, if we have a good intelligence, intel, and other, cyber and other joint capabilities with Japan, with the United States, etc., with Taiwan. Taiwan is a cyber superpower. Then I can tell you, we will be able to ensure that Mr. Xi Jinping will find it impossible to do anything against India. He learned the lesson of his life, like Jawaharlal Nehru learned the lesson of his life in '62. I want to say very clearly, an attack on India is an attack on the entire Indo-Pacific architecture, which favors a strong Indo-Pacific. An attack on Taiwan, an attack on Japan, an attack on Australia is an attack on India. We are together in this attack. If it's Taiwan today, it'll be India tomorrow. If it's India today, it'll be Taiwan tomorrow. Frankly, It'll be Japan, the day after tomorrow. We are all in it together. And unless we work together, unless we can form an alliance in the way that the alliance partners could not in the 1930s. I mean, Chamberlain, till the very end, thought Hitler was better than Stalin. Stalin in 39, 38, they were begging them, 37, 36, 37, 38, 39. He was begging, Daladier and Chamberlain, please have an alliance with us. They said, no, we can't touch Stalin. Hitler is better. Well, I can only say if we have a similar problem and we, as people fighting this hegemonism, do not come together, if we do not fight the prejudice in all our minds against these other countries, and you must know the Ukraine war, I've been very critical of American policy, very critical of EU policy, very critical of Joe Biden, for example, very critical of Johnson. But the reality is, where China is concerned, we all need each other. I think they are understanding that finally, that they are now in Cold War 2.0. They're getting some very heavy knocks on the head. And all those leaders who were insisting that it's still 1.0, European voters are punishing them for destroying their economies.
Professor, sir, thanks for that, sir. I have one question. Like, while you were speaking about the Indo-Pacific, recently we saw that China also tried to intercept the Australian aircraft, and we saw that their shafts got pulled into their aircraft which was flying, and the same incident also we saw in the Canadian aircraft while it was conducting its legal activities. So, do you think now China is trying to get control over the waterways and trying to demonstrate its aggression policies again over the like after going from the land to the waterways also?
Well, I'd like to say one thing, and that is the Chinese are very good at buying up people. There are many people who are Canadian citizens, American citizens, British citizens, European Union citizens who are basically working for China at very fat salaries, including pilots, may I say, including those who are in the Navy, including those who are in the Air Force. They're working for China for the money, for the salaries. They're working in various think tanks and other things. So the Chinese definitely have a game plan. It's very obvious what they're doing. And yes, they will try and do this. Now, I want to sound an alert here. There is a Chinese military vessel dressed in civilian garb that is supposed to berth in Hambantota in about a week's time, in about 2 weeks' time.
Yes.
That military vessel has got enormous snooping capability. The idea is to ensure that it maps the area in such a way that it can succeed in a naval encounter or in an aerial encounter with any of the navies and air forces that can challenge them, predominantly among them becoming India. In my view, India has got to make it very clear to Ranil Wickremesinghe, if that spy ship, and we did actually a show on News X, I think yesterday or so, day before, 1 or 2 days ago, exactly on the Snoop ship that is moving into Hambantota. If the Chinese are allowed to dock at Hambantota, I would say we have to treat the government of Sri Lanka as essentially a satellite of China. And we have to ensure that not one more rupee of Indian taxpayers' money goes to Sri Lanka until this government is removed. This ship, allowing this ship to come, will be a complete threat to all the countries, India, Japan, US, Australia, and Sri Lanka. Because Sri Lanka will be gobbled up. So, okay, if Ranil Wickremesinghe is too weak because a lot of people in Sri Lanka have become very, very successful as a consequence of being linked to China, then what we should do, all right, you're saying it's an open port, anybody can come in, all right, we'll also send similar ships of India, of Japan, of Australia, of the United States into Hambantota at that point in time. and let's go and let's be close to a Chinese ship. It's a civilian ship after all. Why should they mind? I mean, if they're civilians, then if they define themselves civilian, even with their capabilities, then they should consider these ships also civilian. So either Sri Lanka says, sorry, we cannot allow this to happen, because Gotabaya Rajapaksa, when he took office, said, we will not threaten the security interests of India. This ship threatens the security interests of the democratic world. Either if they don't agree, from that time onwards, the Sri Lankan government has to be treated as a satellite of China, number one. Number two, ships, similar ships from India, from the Quad countries, should also go into Hambantota and should also conduct similar exercises alongside the Chinese ship. And the Chinese object. Why should they? Because after all, I mean, by their definition, these will also be civilian ships. So I can say that the Chinese are active, and this is a very real danger. You can see probing missions into India. Their Air Force, aircraft flying there. They will be having snoop devices attached to that, very, very definitely. And they're flying overhead. And, their naval vessels are doing all kinds of patrolling. Their submarines are, I'm sure, very close to where you are. I mean, if you're near Mangalore, they're probably very close to Mangalore. So the reality is that this is a situation that we are facing. This is a threat that we are facing. And we have to be very clear. If Sri Lanka is to be helped by the democracies, it must prove that it is for the democracies and not for a unipolar autocracy ruled world.
Thanks, sir.
Coming to the main question, main subject of today. Coming to the theater, like Indo-US theater, where exactly all of the democracies stand? Regarding Quad Plus, and what is its purpose? And US, Australia, and UK, they formed a separate group called AUKUS, and even before that, IPEF has been formed by US, and later by Chinese have formed an RP, a regional corporation or something like that. And what exactly is happening and cooking in there, sir? Who are the players, and what exactly is happening there?
Well, I'd like to say that I support the government of India in not joining RCEP. The reality is that India has got bilateral free trade agreements with most of the countries that are members of RCEP, or will soon get bilateral trade partnerships with them. Essentially, the one country that will benefit the most from India joining will be China, because they can flood our country with even more imports than they're already flooding the country with, and that's quite a lot. So on RCEP, very, very clear. On I2U2, I would say, like Quad, it's also technology. But let's be honest, all this is essentially to build up our strength in the event of a kinetic showdown. Let's not be squeamish about saying that. If you're in government, you will not say that. And of course, there's a justification for that, in the sense that, let's say, for example, Indian diplomacy has been very restrained about talking about China. The Chinese have been pretty hysterical talking about India. So when I meet very top diplomats, and the topmost diplomats in India, what they say is, look, we don't want to be seen as the aggressive power. We want the whole world to know who is committing the aggression and who is the aggressive power. And therefore, we are keeping our, composure, and we are behaving in a non-aggressive fashion, at least verbally. At the same time, we understand the aggression of China, and we are building up our capabilities to ensure that when that aggression comes, we'll be ready for it. Hopefully, those capabilities are built up along with partners. So the reality of the situation is, frankly, that it is a reality that China is today the target country. It's a reality that decoupling, and Nikunj, if I'm not mistaken, is in Bengaluru. Well, Bengaluru is being looked at very actively as a tech hub for tech companies relocating from China, Taiwanese companies, Japanese companies, American companies, relocating from China they want to relocate elsewhere. And Karnataka, I mean, frankly, if you ask me, I have a small, vested interest in it because my university is on that coast. I would say Udupi district, for example, is an excellent location for a Silicon Valley, for a tech hub. Look at the number of institutions in Udupi district. Look at the number of technical institutes in Udupi district. Look at the immense population wealth of Udupi district. So, in my view, smaller towns are better than large metropolises, but tech hubs are going to come to India. Decoupling is happening, and all that is taking place. Why is there no sanctions on India? I mean, because we have made it very clear from the start that our target is China. We are not going to sign on to your agenda, your Israeli agenda on Iran or the US agenda on Russia. We will sign on to the joint agenda of all democracies against the Sino-Wahhabi alliance. I think it's a very principled stand, a very correct stand, and from that point of view, 2023 can be a year of opportunity for India. Just give me, one third of a minute. I can't resist showing you two books. One is this book. It's called The Little Red Book by an author named Mao Zedong. And if you read it, you will find his philosophy, and that will answer your question as to whether they seek total global primacy or not. Please learn it from The Little Red Book of Mao Zedong. It's a book, and in fact, he has written some very interesting treatises on military strategy. His treatises on the military, Stalin's treatises on politics. These are all books that you need to read because these are strategic thinkers. And Mao Zedong doubled the land area of China by grabbing Tibet, grabbing Xinjiang, grabbing Manchuria, grabbing Inner Mongolia. What happened to us? Burma left, Sri Lanka left, Nepal left, Pakistan and Bangladesh, they left, and we were left with much less than what the British had controlled. When we claim to be the inheritors of the British Raj, we have inherited a territory much less than what the British had ruled. And one by one, they gave it away because they realized that, India is going to become free. And they believed that India would be hostile to the West. That is largely as a consequence of one or two leaders. I'm not going to get into that. But, that was the situation. The second book is something called Journey of a Nation, Indian Foreign Policy at 75 Years. It's by a chap called Madhav Nalapat. I don't know if you're aware of Madhav Nalapat. It's a book on foreign policy for a real world. You read a lot of wonderful treatises of foreign policy about Cold War 1.0 world. This is a book which is about Cold War 2.0 world and what India's foreign policy is. And significantly, I would say, it has evolved. Jaishankar, for example, in his interactions, on matters regarding Russia, he has been pretty good, if I may say so, at conveying the reality of Cold War 2.0, of conveying the reality of the new world order. And from that point of view, please understand in today's world, what are the realities of today's world? What are the needs of today's world? And we don't understand it. If the Americans don't understand it, if Japan doesn't understand it, we're all in trouble. Because, as happened in Europe, first they come for Tejas, then they come for Nikunj, then they come for Gopi, and finally they'll come for me. So if they come for any of us, all of us have to stand together. And this is the situation now that's taking place. So my request is, please understand modern geopolitics and the modern world and understand what a modern foreign policy needs to look like?
I have a question, Nalapatji.
Go ahead.
Can you throw some light, which I've been reading recently, of between Russia and China on the rare earth minerals that they're planning to trade on?
Well, the Russians have a lot of rare earths, and so have the Chinese. There's no question about that. And in fact, in our case, whenever we come across rare earths, whenever we come across uranium, whenever we come across coal, somehow there's always a PIL, there's always some NGO that blocks it, and then it's blocked by one means or the other, and it's never utilized. I mean, we need not have gone begging for uranium across the world. We have enough uranium for our own, but for some reason, it's not been unlocked. We have enough rare earths, but we're not really developing that. In fact, a large part of those monazite sands in Kerala, the black sands, those sands which contain rare earth were exported to, guess what? China. Exported in a very low price to China. And somebody would have made a profit out of it, but the reality is India lost. And the previous governments allowed that export. This government, of course, has blocked it. The previous government allowed it. So, I mean, I can only say, Nikunj, the Russians and the Chinese will do what they have to do. We know what the Chinese want. As for the Russians, they have no choice. They have chosen China as a default option. They wanted the West rejected them. Now they're friendly with India. And I think it's good that we have a lifeline to Russia. It's good we have a lifeline to Iran, because tomorrow or day after it may come in handy, even to countries in the United States, if that lifeline is there. But the fact is, we need to get our act together. Another country rich in rare earths is Australia. Let's go ahead. India, let's develop our rare earths. Let's make sure the Australians develop their rare earths and make that a central part of Quad activity.
Thank you, Nalapatji. Thank you.
And other question, coming to the point of Sino-Wahhabi, alliance, how are they going to play a role, a critical role, or destabilizing India? They might be working on a certain plan and could be funding some of the organizations, the so-called terrorist organizations within India, and they might be provoking for a civil war sort of a thing. So what is their plan, sir? You have any, overlook on that?
Tejas, unfortunately, I don't have about 16 to 17 hours to explain that to you, but I would encourage you to read some of my writings on the Sino-Wahhabi. In fact, I believe I'm the individual who coined the term Sino-Wahhabi Alliance. And please read my thing on that. You're perfectly right. They are incentivizing terrorism. They are promoting terror. They are promoting hate. They are promoting the otherizations in India. And they are promoting violence and other things. All that is happening. And they are promoting the fringes on both sides, not just one side. In the US, the black and white fringes. The left and right, what we call left and right. And may I say that in certain aspects of economic policy, there is very little difference between people who think they're in the right side in terms of certain aspects and people who think they're on the left side. The policies are almost the same. In their opinion of certain countries, it's almost the same. So really, left, right, etc. These are very slippery concepts. I think we should be very careful about using that. So we should basically use the concept of Sanatan Dharma versus the precepts, the undharmic precepts of the other side, of the side led by the intending hegemon. And I think what we are interested in is promoting a Sanatani world and interested in broadening the space of acceptance of Sanatani world. And in that, let's not be tied by the narrow boundaries of religion. Let me be quite honest here. The Ramayana. I believe the Ramayana is not myth, as has been conveyed to us by British and Europeans and all that. It is reality. That is why, for example, I strongly support the Ram Setu being made a national monument. I would like to see a tourist trail from Ayodhya to Lanka and back. When I was in Lanka, I was taken to the site where Sita Devi rested, the forest patch where she rested. They have lovingly preserved it. Have we done anything about the Ram Path, the path of Lord Ram? No, we have not. Have we done anything about the path taken by Lord Hanuman? We have not. Even the Ram Setu, which was built in a sense by a very brilliant engineer named Hanuman, is not there. Our Hitopadesa, our Panchatantra, oh, they're religious. They're religious. And so unfortunately, some of us also say, हाँ ये तो हमारा है, तुम्हारा नहीं. ये सब लोग का है. Lord Ram belongs to everybody. The Hitopadesa, the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, they belong to everybody. That is the glory of Sanatana Dharma. It belongs to everybody. And I can only say, we have to rediscover that glory, because I can tell you, other parts of the world are rediscovering that glory. Now, I mean, I'm not in favor of laws curbing consumption of certain types of liquid, certain types of food. I'm not in favor of that at all. It has to be done out of one's free will, not out of the compulsion of law. But I find so many people in Europe and America becoming vegetarian. Young people. I sit down at the table with a friend, let's say a person I've known, an influential policymaker, and his young daughter comes and sits at the table, and she and I are vegetarians. And her father says, look, she's been a vegetarian since the age of 13. Now, you have, I don't believe yoga is a religious thing at all, but, there are, so many things. There are so meditation, all these various things are there. And this kind of thing is now becoming more and more common across the world. The discovery of the Dharmic life is becoming more and more common across the world. And this is irrespective of religion. A few weeks ago, I sat down at the home of a Muslim friend. And one of the members of the family was completely vegetarian. And not even a female member, a male member, completely vegetarian. Why? I think it's a much better diet. Simple, So I only want to say, let's be careful about the traps that are being set for us by the Sino-Wahhabi alliance. Let's be careful of the attempt to create more and more hate. Let's be very wary, and let's ensure that we have smart policy to succeed in creating a universal world, a world where dharmic precepts and dharmic universality are there across the world. I'll give you a simple example of human rights. The European Union, the Commonwealth, countries like Britain, keep lecturing India about minority rights. Are they looking at what's happening to minorities in Pakistan, Bangladesh? Are they? What's happening to, there are no minorities in Pakistan, they've almost driven out. That same situation is coming in Bangladesh. Why don't they talk about the number of minorities in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh and check the trend line? The trend line is right down for Bangladesh and Pakistan, and India is going up. And yet you have these, these foreign office chaps. You have the Jeremy Corbyns. Corbyn is very much a part of the Sino-Wahhabi network, by the way, as much as, that Ilhan Omar is a part of Sino-Wahhabi network. These people, they look at mathematics, and we should be smarter in talking about mathematics. Abusing them, ye aisa hai, ye hai, wo hai, all kinds of horrible words. They're, secular, they're whatever. Look, that's fine, that's wonderful. You can use your temper, go to a room, lock the doors and windows so nobody can hear you, and shout and scream all you want. But outside, please don't do it. Because I can assure you, it is not effective as a tool of persuasion or communication. It's just not effective. So I want to say I'm very optimistic about Sanatan Dharma spreading across the world. I'm not entirely sure that it will happen fastest in India, but it is happening across the world. Why? Because deep down, every human being wants a dharmic world and a dharmic life. Every human being. That is the point.
Thank you, sir. With your permission, last question regarding LAC. What exactly is happening at the LAC, sir? I mean, like whether it is on the eastern front, on the western front, Arunachal Pradesh, or the Ladakh area.
No, I don't understand, Gopi. You're talking about the LAC. What is the LAC?
Yeah.
Chinese don't recognize the LAC. There's no
Okay.
LAC for them. They have a mobile LAC. It keeps shifting. They have a flexi LAC. So, let me put it this way. If you are determined to come to an agreement with me, and I am determined to avoid an agreement with you, then there's no point in waiving the terms of agreement. I don't recognize the terms of agreement. Please tell me what the LAC is. I've been to Beijing multiple times. They tell me what is this we're talking about? It's our boundaries, and our boundaries are, of course, into Arunachal, into Ladakh. That's one China. And each time I hear somebody from India say, "Oh, we believe in one China policy," I'm reminded of those gentlemen in Beijing and those ladies who are in the military and other elements of the Communist Party machine who talk about Arunachal being part of one China, Ladakh being part of one China, the Sikkim being part of one China. What are you talking about? How can you support one China when one China includes all these Indian territories? There's no such thing as a one China policy unless you say we define one China our own way. And when I said very frankly that, except in 52 or 53, Vijay Lakshmi Pandit made some stray remark in the UNGA, a stray remark. We have never acknowledged that Taiwan is part of one China. And nor should we, because Taiwan is a superconductor king. And Taiwan is essential in the war of the future. We can't afford Taiwan to go to the Chinese grip. So, when you talk of one China, are you saying Ladakh is part of China? Are you saying Arunachal is part of one China? And yet you have got people coming in seminar rooms writing one China. India believes in the one China policy. I'm sorry. I believe in the one China policy with one China defined as the way I define. And if Rishabh Gulati, the managing editor of Newsweek, defines one China, he defines one China as minus Tibet, minus Manchuria, minus Inner Mongolia, and minus Xinjiang, or rather East Turkestan. That's his definition of China. So one China for each of us is a China defined by ourselves. So let me tell you, Gopi, I'm glad you're talking about the LAC. Wonderful that you believe in the LAC, but I'm sorry, but the other side does not believe in the LAC. So when you wave, an agreement form in front of me, and I don't recognize that agreement at all, I think you're just wasting your breath. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Thank you, Professor Nalapat. Thank you, Lord. On behalf of VHS Karnataka, I thank Professor MD Nalapat for accepting our request and enlightening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, and thank
Continue.
you, Nikunji. Thank you, Nikunji. Thank you, Tejas, and thank you, Ishwaraya, and thank you, Garigi Rakesh, for all your support. And last but not least, thank you all the wonderful viewers for making Samvada success. Please stay safe, and please do visit